Hello, Bootstrappers.
Hello, Bootstrappers.
So in this episode, we're going to introduce a friend of mine, Matt Price. I met him through a mutual friend in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they ran Bourbon and Boots, which was an amazing, it started off kind of a newsletter, but what I loved about it was how they used content as a way to build up their customer base and attract customers. But I'm going to let kind of Matt tell his story, and then we'll jump into it.
All right. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Eva, for inviting me to be on this today. Yeah, Bourbon and Boots was essentially a handmade artisan e-commerce site. And we launched it, let's see, in about 2011, 2012, because you kind of got to put this in context where things were at that time. And e-commerce was still a pretty small percentage of overall retail sales.
And Etsy hadn't dominated yet, right? I mean, There was still a chance for anyone to take the field, because now you're like, well, wait, isn't that Etsy? But, you know.
Yeah, there were definitely similarities with Etsy. I think at this point, Etsy had gone public just recently, but there was a lot of movement in the direction around rethinking a different approach to e-commerce. And what we wanted to do is with Bourbon and Boots, we basically took a brand idea, which was Southern lifestyle, and then wanted to apply that to an e-commerce company, an e-commerce vertical. And it was interesting the way we launched, because I kind of have this framework that I use when I'm starting kind of any project that is going to involve any sort of customer acquisition. And it's the give a crap hurdle.
Sure.
We're on YouTube, so the give a shit hurdle. Is this going to be valuable enough to a consumer to give a shit about this? Are they going to care?
What you can't do is just pay for search advertising and try to acquire the customer every time, because now you're competing with Amazon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to get crushed, and you're going to spend a ton of money that you don't have.
So the give a shit hurdle, is that basically testing the waters to say, is this idea, is this brand enticing enough for people to actually have a relationship with?
Yes. And, the way I think about it is this kind of has to happen during the ideation stage, or building your plan of what kind of company you want to build. If you're building a SaaS product, or if you're building an e-commerce company, or a media site, or a content site, anything like that, you have to have a really good understanding of what your positioning is, not real detailed, but you need to have a really good idea who is going to care about what you're doing.
Right. Seth Godin really covered that in This Is Marketing book.
Right.
I mean, so you're like, I want to do the Southern lifestyle brand. What was the first way to test it to say, does this idea have any legs?
Yeah. So this was the real fun part, and we kind of surprised ourselves, because we had this idea for the product, but we wanted to figure out, okay, again, are people going to give a shit? And so we came up with kind of a framework for figuring out, is this going to matter? And we looked at existing brands in the market. So we were looking at media companies. We were looking at Garden and Gun, Southern Living, Better Home and Gardens, those types of publications, because we knew that we weren't going to completely overlap with any of them, but we knew we would be in the broader universe of those people. And so before we had any product, before we had a website, we launched, I think, initially about 5 different landing pages. And each of those landing pages had what we felt like was an image or some copy that was going to basically give the brand promise for, if you engage with us, this is what it's going to be like. This is who we are, and this is who we think you are. And and we took those landing pages and then targeted that to about 30 or 40 different audiences on Facebook. And again, this is pre-product, pre-major investment in any sort of operations, to basically figure out if people are going to give a crap.
I have 2 questions for you real quick. One is, so when you targeted to like 30 or so different audiences, what was the critical number where you knew that enough people had seen it that you got good feedback?
So we didn't use that as a metric. We were trying to acquire email addresses. So we were looking at it from a cost per email acquisition. So that was basically what we were looking at. That was kind of our one metric, our North Star metric that we were going after. And what we were able to find pretty quickly is that this was in 2012, early 2012, we could acquire email addresses around this brand promise for anywhere from 25 cents to $1.15. And you start looking at the economics of that, and that's pretty valuable. And
so given that spread, like talk about the kind of different kind of targeting you thought about that gave you, because obviously everyone wants 25 cents. No one wants $5. What kind of things did you test?
We tested everything. I mean, we tested audience, we tested copy, and we tested images. The interesting thing is later on down the road, we found images move the needle the most. But early on, that wasn't necessarily the case. What we found was it was more around the copy and then the audience. One of our best, I was looking at some of the old ad groups. One of our best performing ads was, it had something along the line of, "This isn't your mom's Southern living."
That's awesome.
Those lines. So it was a real strong brand positioning statement. And that really caused people to want to engage with us. And at an early stage, figuring out if people are going to give a shit, this was pretty clear that people were going to give a shit about what we had to say.
So I'm just wanted to zoom out, especially if let's say I'm a new entrepreneur thinking about this, right? I'm going to describe what I think I hear you say, which is, so you had an idea. What you really wanted to test was, given this brand promise, how many people will give a shit? Mm-hmm. And what that looked like was landing pages, and I'm making this up, but I think it's what you're saying, a very simple landing page with strong images, strong copy, strong text on there. Mm-hmm. And the call to action was, give us your email. If you believe in what we're saying and you're curious, give us your email.
Yeah. And
then it was ad spend on Facebook to a variety of audiences.
Right.
And then looking at, based on the amount of money spent on advertising, how much did it cost per email?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely. And we had a different formula we kind of used independent of ad group. So we'd have an ad group, we'd have our overall average cost per email. And that's where it was, we'd have some ad groups that were about 25 cents per email, but about our overall for all of our ad groups was closer to the dollar range, because we had some that were $2, $3, but then we also had some that were 25, 50 cents.
And just to give the audience an indicator, we had a similar path in 1995. So the fundamentals haven't changed. I mean, our first question is how much does it cost us to get someone to put a profile into the dating site? And because that's the give a crap measure, right? It's like, are enough people ready to date on the internet? And it was $5 for us in 1995. Our big competitor Match only had 20,000 profiles. So we just went, okay, for $100,000, we can catch them. So the dynamics are the same here.
Yeah. And, it was interesting too, because again, this is 2012. And even today, I mean, people still say the same thing. Email's dead. When you're at a stage, when you're at such an early stage, and you only have, such a finite amount of time and money and energy, so if everything you do is either building on your learning or kind of creating an asset that's going to be valuable over time, that's why we kind of ended up focusing so much on emails, because we knew that the lifetime of those emails was going to be substantial. We knew that the early activities we were doing, it was going to actually, be an asset that would be carried forward if the business was going to continue.
So now, do you have any favorite exercises you go through? Because I know you've done this more than once, coming up with brands and testing it. How do you create all that positioning and verbiage around it? What's your process?
So there's a really great book, and I kind of copy this. I've actually got it right here. The Ultimate Sales Letter by Dan Kennedy. I don't know if you guys have ever read it.
We will be.
We will be.
So he's a direct mail guy. He's not a digital guy. So he's heavily focused on targeting and copywriting. And that is what has been really valuable to, what we did at Bourbon and Boots and what we've done since. And he has this one part that I actually got cut out and put up in the wall of my office. And it's like 10 smart market diagnosis and profiling questions. So like the first,
go down the list, huh?
Yeah. The first one is, and again, this is thinking about your customers and what they're thinking about, what their lives are like, just being very empathetic with them. And, what keeps them awake at night? What are they afraid of? What are their top 3 daily frustrations? And I think, what's interesting, when you're in an early stage, you don't have to answer all these questions. You can really just answer one of these questions to get to a point where that people are going to give a crap about what it is you're doing.
So what was the one question that you nailed on Bourbon and Boots? Which one helped you find them?
At the time, it was more about there's got to be a better way to find non-Amazon e-commerce type experience. There's got to be a way to give some personality to an e-commerce store. If that's, previous to that, I'd been working at a large, kind of e-com 1.0 type company. And a lot of it was, there's not a lot of personality, not a lot of brand. And so
for your customers, were they just looking for something that they could find that, that Southern feel in, or what do you think you were satisfying there?
Yeah, I think it was probably identity based. I think it was, this is a reflection of me. We're getting a little esoteric in the reason for why they did it, but where can I find cool local stuff that no one else is going to have?
Sure. So you can brag.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. That was a whole lot.
I remember some of the items you sold. They were great. They were really, really cool. I just can imagine walking into a really cool boutique in Memphis and they being there and like being able to go back, home and nobody else having them. A little edgy, a little sassy,
right.
A bit of a, flair to it, but just different.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really kind of, it was a way to give people a thing they can purchase that gives them more personality. It enhances their own personal brand to be associated with our brand. So it was, and that was the interesting part. Now, looking back on it, it was very brand focused. I think in the midst of it, didn't totally understand how brand focused it was. But yeah, that was a lot of how we were thinking about it. So we didn't answer one of those questions real well.
So how do you know when your promise doesn't work? Is it when the email acquisition costs too high? Where have you tried this and the answer was don't do it? Because I know you've tried a lot of you're like me, you've tried a lot of projects.
Yeah.
When have you gone through this and you just went, I just don't think I understand how to get to these people?
There have definitely been, again, it depends on the type of product and the acquisition channel that you're trying to use. I have found where it's definitely too expensive to acquire customers. You go to a lot of different channels and you can look what I've looked at before where I've come into, it's going to be too cost competitive or to buy any sort of keywords. It's going to be too technically difficult to target those folks on Facebook. And the ones where there wasn't a lot of pain necessarily. Now this is a little separate from e-commerce. You kind of put e-com and SaaS and they're kind of separate things. But yeah, if there's no immediate pain, if no one has said somewhere in the interwebs that this insert your idea sucks, I need to solve for this problem. Like if you can't find just even one person out there talking about how much this one thing sucks, then it can be tough.
Maybe don't explore that one.
Yeah. It's not worth the time.
I do think that the whole notion of starting with like one question, if it's a powerful enough question to find the audience, is really brilliant, because then like once you get some, you can always ask them about the other questions.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that was really interesting that we started doing these surveys, and we were doing these surveys to do a better job communicating with our customers. And we wanted to understand how they viewed us, how would they describe us to someone else?
What did you learn?
We learned a ton of things. we learned that we were more of a brand than we thought we were. We were more, people enjoyed our content a lot, where we didn't necessarily know that in the beginning. Like we couldn't gauge that in a real clear way. Like we weren't tracking it in a way that was really valuable to tell us that. So we got a lot of open-ended qualitative data around how people perceived what we were doing, which was super valuable, especially around copywriting and just messaging the brand to new people. Those first 10, 15 customers that you have, talking to them, staying as close to them as you can, they're going to give you feedback that you haven't even thought about, that then you can take, repackage to get your next 15 customers, because they're talking to you, they're telling you the way they would refer your product to a friend. But now you've got that information, that qualitative kind of copy that you can then turn around and use.
You've got the in language.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. In GrowthX, Sean Shepard, that was a big part of his process, is he would really interview the customers and then start talking back to them in their language.
Yeah.
Because, they don't really care about your product. They care about their world, their issues, and you have to reflect that back. And it's not easy at the first, but once you've got a few customers, then you can start mimicking them.
Yeah. And if you're in the situation where you kind of built a product, or you're pre-launch or beta or whatever you want to call it, there's a really great tool that I've found that I've used on some other projects, SurveyMonkey. They have I think most people know them from their survey software, which is great, but they also have a survey panel. And that survey panel, are you guys familiar with that?
No, tell us about it. That's interesting.
I was going to say, I can share my screen real quick and show it to you. It's pretty powerful.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So SurveyMonkey maintains their own universe of people who will take surveys, essentially, and then they've got them parsed out into their different demographic segments: industry, business, income, geography. And now there's definitely a real price tag to this, and the price tag can get high, but early on you can find out some really insightful things, some quantitative stuff and some qualitative stuff.
So writing surveys is not something you just do off the top of your head. How'd you learn to do this well?
It's a good question. I like to think that I'm getting better every day. I don't know how great I'm at it right now, but the way I approach it is I just try to focus on a very finite group of people who have a very explicit problem, very, very small numbers realistically, so I can get to understand how often they experience the problem. Is this problem a big enough problem for them to get over the give a shit hurdle? And that's kind of how I design it. And typically I like to look at it in a couple different ways. Like I like to get some quantitative feedback, but then I also really like to get some good qualitative feedback, because, being able to have those type of open-ended questions is really going to help you in a lot of other spaces. It's going to help you in your copywriting and then product design as well.
It's funny, there's a book called The Mom Test, and in it, his big question, if someone says something's a problem, and this is more in a business context, the follow-up question is always, well, how much did you spend trying to fix that problem the last 6 months?
Right.
Because if someone's not spending any effort, it's not really a problem. They're just griping.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't pass the mom test or the give a shit hurdle.
Yeah, so that's a great example of a quantitative, right? So you're asking for a specific dollar amount. What would be a great example, Matt, of a qualitative question that's open-ended that would give like a peer into their world?
Right. So, you talked about other projects. I'm starting to put together how I've done this in the past. So what I've done is I've, obviously started out with an idea, with a concept, and then I've come here to try to figure out who and where the people are. Or maybe a better way to put that is to figure out if this is really a problem for a certain group of people. And I've gone in and target different business sectors, different industries, job functions, the different type of software they use. And that's actually the one I'd used before, was targeting people that use Salesforce. And then some other...
Oh, they're in pain.
Right. Yeah, they're in a lot of pain. And go in and ask them, what do you think about this? How much have you, kind of to your question, how much have you spent to try to solve this? And then what I do is take this feedback, and again, you can get really granular with this tool. It's a fantastic tool. You can change the amount of responses you need. You can ask a different screening question. This is actually something we've used recently for a client, and that's even better because then you can kind of drill down even further. And then take a lot of the learnings and use some of the landing page software. And I know you guys have talked a little bit about landing page software.
Well, what do you like?
So I've used pretty much all of them. Right now, I'm using Lead Pages, which you can see some of the templates they have. You know, they've got a million different templates. It's a very easy WYSIWYG drag and drop type solution, but it starts you from a really good point. And it's got different activation pieces. You know, it can be for a video or watch this video, sign up with your email, download this white paper, all sorts of stuff like that. And the same thing with Instapage. Yeah, so Instapage, and I said Instapage actually does a better integration with Google pay-per-click. They tie into their ad product a lot better, at a lot more granular level. But then there's another one called Unbounce, which is also a really good product I've used before.
I've used them too.
Yeah, they're a good product as well. All three of these are good. So, you know, Lead Pages is probably a little more introductory than Instapage. Instapage is a little more granular around Google Ads, and then massive A/B testing. And then Unbounce is pretty good for all of it. But it gives you the tool, you know, if you combine, you know, talking to your audience to figure out what they care about early on, and then take that information, craft multiple landing pages, because you're going to be only part right, you know, with each one early on, and how your customer likes to be talked to. And you can get some pretty actionable feedback in a short period of time.
What it's about is trying to learn as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Matt, do you have any examples of, like, you know, that just off the top of your head, where somebody like filled out like one of the open-ended questions and you were just like, whoa, and like had an immediate gain from it?
Yes, but now I'm trying to remember what it was. There was definitely one we got at Bourbon and Boots that was very specific, that we took and we used it in all of our marketing after that. And it was...
So they gave you a phrase?
They gave us a phrase. It was the question about how you describe us to your friends. How do you describe us to your mom?
Ooh, I like that. How do you describe us to your friends to get their language? That's good.
Yeah. And then, you know, we've had I did one on a project that I'm still mulling around, which is kind of a travel agent type network thing. It's kind of irrelevant. But the survey question was trying to understand how people make decisions about where to travel. That was one of the questions I asked. I asked it in a more open-ended way. And the information I got back I got about the same answer from about 3 people, which these are 3 people that do not know each other, that are completely unrelated, only connected by, I think, the age and the fact they're on a SurveyMonkey panel. And they mentioned this same Instagram account.
Really?
And that was a gold mine. And then once I found that out, I was able to really dive into this person and try to understand who they were in the influencer network, just to figure out why it was so highly touted and highly followed.
Because whatever we're resonating with a huge section of the population.
Right. And they were, you know, in this instance, they were providing a lot of value to this person, but not collecting a lot of the value for themselves as an influencer. That's kind of how I was looking at it.
Now with Bourbon and Boots, I'm trying to think back to 2012 and 2011, and like one of the things that stands out for me is that y'all did a really good job of curating like objects that like completely fit your branding, completely fit your audience. So if we like, how did you create the relationships with the producers and the creators of the actual merchandise?
Yeah, that was a moving target. It depended on who the people were and depended on how we identified them. But a lot of times it was just, we harassed them. They didn't know who we were early on, but then later, we were able to leverage our list size and talk about, this is our email list size, this is who we reach. And we were able to get them to sign on with us. But
was it a phone call or an email?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It started out early on. It definitely started out as a phone call. I mean, those people were just as important as our first customers. Getting those people to trust us helped us bring on a lot of our first customers.
Because we found that too. I mean, people would just delete our email when we were small and nobody knew who we were. But if we called them and called them enough, sooner or later they'd pick up and we could get through to them and push this process forward.
Right.
We had to call or meet in person, the Critical Watch stuff. So then from just a business design, I'm assuming it's a revenue share, but did they do their own shipping or did you have to hold inventory and then ship or just?
So initially it started out as just a kind of a drop ship arrangement. So the manufacturers and the artists would ship the product once an order was placed. Later on, it became more of a blended model, but that was initially how we started. And even kind of to your point, I think it's so easy early on to feel like you can't do the extra step. You can't do the thing. The way you get your first 10 customers is not the way you're going to get your next 10 customers.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people don't know that early on. You're like, well, I can't afford to go and drive 2 hours to get one vendor for one e-commerce site. But that vendor early on is going to be extraordinarily valuable to your growth over time.
Well, that makes sense.
The Airbnb guys, the founders actually went and photographed the damn rooms themselves initially just to see if it would work or not. Like, does anybody care? Do photos matter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do photos matter?
Yeah.
So question, let's say I'm not a content genius. Now, you said you could read this ultimate sales letter to get better at writing script, but you've got photographs and you've got all this stuff. How did you guys think about getting that content created in a way that didn't break the bank?
I think initially we viewed the content as this is a brand multiplier. And we knew early on that there were going to be pieces of content that were exponentially more valuable than other pieces of content. So you might have one piece of content that is 60% of all of your content driven, or all of your traffic that's being driven by content, 60% of that can be coming from one article. And so early on, we didn't really try to think about like those types of success metrics around our content. We were trying to think of them more as like, these are brand assets we were creating. And your question was around how do we afford that? How do we think about it?
Did you have to do it yourself?
Yeah. Early on, the very beginning, we took submissions. We took submissions from customers, people that, again, those first handful of customers were really, really loyal, really loved the brand. And we asked them if they wanted to be a part of it. And they wrote some of our first articles.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And then some of our vendors did as well later on. And then we got to a point where we felt comfortable paying different writers and finding different writers to write for us. Once we started to get a better understanding of the metrics of how creating this piece of content is going to over time yield a lot of traffic and a lot of conversions.
Given like everything that like Matt walked us through, Like, what are the top 3 things that you wish somebody had told you when you were first starting One and Only?
Wait, are you asking me or Matt?
Yeah, no, I'm asking you. Like, so we just listened to this, and he just laid out just a whole ton of gold, right? Like, so for me, like, I think about like what I wish, like I had known, like Matt, if I could have like had you go back in time and knock on my door at Critical Watch and say, hey, Eva, remember those first few customers are your most valuable, and they're not going to look like the next, but they're going to be the ones that light the path and show you what the path looks like to them. And if you learn from them and see the path the way they do and where it hurts, then you'll be able to reach more customers like a lot easier. Like I'm like, we learned that, but it took us like years.
For me, it's this whole concept of brand. I mean, you guys built a very valuable brand that you punched way above your weight. That was just amazing to watch. We ignored that because we didn't understand it. And I guarantee you, based on our sales price versus Match's sales price, you know, we were twice as big as them, outgrowing them. They had died, had hardly any employees. We still sold for the same amount because they had built a brand asset. We probably lost $100 to $200 million because we didn't take the time and do this branding and make it resonate with our customers. And we had the money and we could have done it. We just didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah, we didn't put the same emphasis on it. You know, and the thing I'm curious about right now that I wrote down is the ultimate sales letter. So I'm really curious about that. I'm curious about copy and what that would be like. And I have another curiosity around like how do you design surveys in a way that gives you both a quantitative and qualitative value?
So those are some things we'll definitely have to dig in as we move forward on putting this channel together. Awesome. Well, Matt, I really appreciate your time, taking your time out to share with us that early stage, you know, content-driven acquisition and branding. Like, how do you resonate a brand, figure out if it matters to other people? It's a really amazing story. And it's interesting. You're not guaranteed success ever when you start out this journey. But if you keep cranking on it, I think you can get there and find a product that people really do care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as easy as ever to do it now. Thanks so much for having me, Will. And thanks, Eva, as well.
You bet.
Leave us comments about things that resonated with you down in the comments section. Anything you want us to cover, we've got a survey up. Go fill it out. This channel's for you, not us. We want to help you on the journey and figure out how we can be most helpful.